Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 198. Now, let me do my little bit of boomer fiddling. Good, that should be all that. Okay, first of all, before we go on this evening, I've got to apologize for last week. I lost a day last week. I put it down to ever-increasing age. And on Saturday, I thought it was Friday for some unknown reason, which is why we didn't have a stream last week. There was no great disaster. It was nothing to do with any of my guests. It was entirely my fault. So my apologies. I did actually put up a notice in the community notes bit of YouTube. If you ever want to keep up with what's going on with this channel, do check on the community notes bit of my channel, because I do put notes in there most of the time, like I announce all these streams in there and that sort of thing. But yeah, so I did put a note up on there, but apologies that we weren't around last week. Nothing to do with my guests, entirely my fault because I'm a boomer idiot. Also, before we go on, if you want to support the channel or ask a super chat question, and we will answer any super chat question fully at the end of the stream, before the end of the stream, you can do so via the entropy link, which is pinned at the top of the chat. If you want to know what the thumbnail is, because loads of people ask me this, that's also there, although I will also pin it in a comment after the stream. Number of subjects this week, but before we go any further, I'm going to play us a little bit of a tune which gives people a chance to get into the stream and what have you.
Take up the white man's burden, send your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy hardness, for the white man's burden, in patience to abide the threats of terror and check the show of pride by open speeches.
Well then, and I thought my tickets you look bad. It'll come on in a minute.
Yeah, it was a bit staticky for me, so I feel something like that might happen.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's working, guys. Apologies. I will try and sort that out for next week. We will see if I can sort that out for next week. Anyway, no worries. I'm not going to try and sort that out now, because it will just result in large amounts of dead air. Good evening, Mitch. Good evening, Hitman. How are you guys doing this evening, or this morning for me?
Well, I'm all right. Thank you.
How are you going, Mitch?
Same old, same old.
Ever the optimist, Mitch. Right. Yeah, so, okay, as always, I'm going to start us off with people who have particular things they want to bring up. Let's go clockwise. Mitch, did you have a first subject for this evening?
I mean, it's more of a conundrum rather than so the polls have been stagnant for reform since the time of the conference season, where reform are basically just 20%. And
good subject, Mitch. I did want to talk about that, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, carry on.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, with lots of AI and others on the dissident right, whatever you want to call us, whatever you want to call ourselves, do have a good point in the sense that why is it that reform are only at 20% when Labour is literally digging its own grave? And as for Kemi Badenoch, I mean, we've got Nadine Dorvis, who's literally writing a memoir saying, first of all, that the Tory party is literally a club full of degenerates, to put it bluntly, in terms of the sexual orgies they have, and B, that Kemi Badenoch works based on African standards of time. I mean, I don't see, but we've got the biggest open goal at the moment in regards to the two mainstream parties being absolutely disastrous, and we've only got reform at 21% of the vote. Now, to be fair, that's an improvement on the general election where we've got 15% of the vote, but still, I am left, and I'm left thinking, why the hell are reforms at 21%? Because it's been this way for the past few months now.
Yep, totally agree. I think the Farage has been it's been much too passive. As you said, Mitch, there's an open goal at the moment. Starmer is an insane psychopath with a pathological hatred of the real British people, from what I can see. The so-called Conservatives selected a Nigerian woman to run them. Like you say, open goal. Puzzle to me. Hitman, what's your take on this?
Well, this is something AA actually commented on earlier today on X, Twitter, and unfortunately it's looking like a suspicion I've had the last several months may actually be true, which is that reform are being astroturfed by the media to essentially serve as basically they're going to get rid of Labour or the Tories, at least one of them, and replace reform as opposition to one of those two. And they're basically being bigged up by the media because if you look, there was like an article which fit Betteridge's law of headlines. Is it impossible for reform to become like the opposition or the government? And well, the answer is always no. So, and I've also noticed the media have stopped attacking Farage as much as they used to, like calling him a racist, etc. And also looking at his demeanour, where he's being so passive, I just think that he sort of like knows, us being the opposition official second party or the actual government is inevitable, so we're just going to wait it out, basically.
Yeah. Look, I agree with what both you guys are saying to some degree. I've seen people coming out with this, and they're the sort of people I would expect to come out with this. They're people I've streamed with. They're people I like. But I also see people criticizing Trump in America. And as I've said before, we are not going to get a homeland government, homeland being the political party. We're not going to get a homeland government at the next election because they're probably not going to be running. And if they are, they're certainly not going to be running all over the country. We might maybe get a homeland government in 10 years or 15 years. Britain doesn't have 10 or 15 years to allow over 500,000 up to 1 million legal immigrants into Britain every one of those 10 or 15 years. We just don't. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're dissident right, whatever you want to call yourself, at the moment, we haven't got any choice but to support reform, because net zero immigration is a damn sight better than nearly 1 million a year. And Britain can't take another 12 to 15 million immigrants, because then even if you did get a real nationalist party, that was into remigration and all the rest of it, that extra 15 million is just going to make it so much harder. So in the meantime, we've kind of got no choice but to support reform because there isn't anyone else. I mean, that's my...
Well, no, I completely understand that. I just was putting out there, I think that suspicion, I think, is perfectly feasible given what we've seen. I mean,
for sure.
I mean, again, like, you know, with people who support Trump, you know, I'm relatively supportive of him. You know, I'm cautiously optimistic. You know, I'm not a MAGA guy. I never will be, but hopefully he'll improve things for our American friends. But we must be prepared for him to perhaps not be as effective as we hope he would be. Only time will tell.
Yeah. No, absolutely, for sure. And like the Americans who I like, who do support Trump, which is nearly all of them, by the way. Like one of the differences in America is that most of what I would describe as the American DR, like the equivalent of us guys in America, are nearly all supportive of Trump. It's the British guys who are mostly not so sure about this, who think it might be containment and blur. Most of the Americans who are of our kind of position, like the old Glory Club guys, for example, do support Trump. And to me, that they do so because there is no alternative, you know, and unless you think there's going to be some sort of civil war or what have you, which I think is completely unrealistic at the moment, even in America. And not that we support violence in any case, in any way, in any case, you know, none of us do. Certainly, this channel does not. Trump's the only option on the table, and in that way, Farage is the only option on the table at the moment. I mean, I think we've got to keep pushing Farage and reform. And sometimes they do some good stuff. I mean, I retweeted something from Tice today, pointing out the climate emergency is bullshit. Yeah. No so-called conservative or Labour politician would put that truth up there, but Tice did.
Like,
Well, I suppose that is a fair point. Sorry, go on, Mitch.
I was just going to say, on the point of, like, you know, academic agents saying the regime want Farage, I mean, so he's basing all this basically on, the media being somewhat a bit neutral in saying, Farage could become a prime minister. But that's not them wanting him, that's literally them just circumscribing themselves. Could Farage get into number 10? And that's not them supporting. It's like the same with, it's like when we say the regime want Trump in power, and I go, why would they? Like, but you literally had 3 assassination attempts on him, one of which resulted in one of the that Corey Computore, however you pronounce his surname, getting killed off. So
yeah, I was just going to say that, Mitch. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, you know, if they wanted him, why were there at least 1 and up to 3 attempts to kill him? You know, that's this is strange for someone the regime want, to be honest.
Yeah, and I don't see why they'd want Farage in charge because, well, at the moment, our leader is always pig-headed nutballs who just insist on, you know, diversity. You know, we've got a Nigerian Tory leader and Keir Starmer who's just a complete brainless. Like, why on earth would these people be okay with Farage succeeding them? There's no rational argument to be had on this, and yeah, it's like, for example, you know, there's the argument that we could get an early election. No, I don't think we're going to get an early election because as much as the Labour and Tories are a uniparty, the fact is the vast majority of us Labour Party MPs aren't going to vote their jobs away unless you had something extreme like something like the winter of discontent or something even more radically worse than that materialising.
I think we're heading for something that's much worse than that. And unlike most people, certainly on this panel, and I think certainly on this panel, I think you and Hitman are not elderly like me. I remember the winter of discontent in the late 70s. I remember that, and we're in a far worse position in Britain today. The nation is much more divided than it was then. There are far more immigrants in the country than there were then. Two-tier care is by far the worst British Prime Minister there has been, certainly since Tony Blair.
I would personally say Boris. I mean, it's still early days, but I say
I
Boris
detest Boris. Don't get me wrong. Listen. The worst British Prime Minister since Blair is a very low bar. Okay, it's a very low bar.
I'd say with Keir Starmer, he's going to be he's good for our side in the sense that, well, as Apostolic Majesty said at the height of the riots, he's unraveling a lot of the containment networks that so successfully held back the right for the past few decades, ever since Enoch Powell. Starmer is so much a pig-headed moron that he's legit unraveling a lot of that.
Oh
so
yeah,
I don't.
He's woken up so many normies. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because his attitude is so anti-Anglo-Celtic British, like real British people. It's so obviously that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that some people in the chat say, "Oh, well, there's different elite factions," and I go, "Okay," but the elite faction that Farage is in bed with, they still want, like, the Britain they're wanting is quite a bit radically different at the moment from what, let's say, someone like what the Tory Party and the Labour Party are wanting.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
Is that what I mean? How many actual Conservative MPs are there in this Parliament? I'd say, in terms of a Conservative Party, I should say, you'd be really struggling to say anything more than, let's say, 5 or 10. Okay, so that's like what? So you got not even 20 odd MPs who are actually amenable to, let's say, politics more our way. But that's still a situation where you're thinking to yourself, well, look, because to be fair, there's a truth that there's going to be an elite turnover. Let's say if Farage were to, like, you can imagine there's some elites who are backing Farage about I was mentioning about Charlie Mullins fellow who 7 years ago was a massive anti-Brexit type and funded the Lib Dems. Now he's on side with Reform, which is weird, but I'll go along with it. But yeah, it's just, I don't see why people are just why people are so much of an inborn loser that they're not seeing Farage as a good step in the right direction. It's like Trump is a good step in the right direction, even though, let's say, even like 6-8 months ago, I can't remember, we were all having a critique of him. Like, I thought he was too pro-immigration, whereas now it's, at the end of the day, he's still steering things our way. But let's say, for argument's sake, Trump were to do his mass deportations of illegals, that deprives deep blue states like California and Illinois and Massachusetts of some of their electoral points and congressional seats that are deprived from like Ohio, who are a lot more Republican. So,
and Mitch, I think I'm right in saying that Farage only a couple of weeks ago actually said publicly that yes, of course I would deport illegal economic migrants, which is all the guys who come across the channel, and also serious foreign criminals. I think he said that only a couple of weeks ago, which many people had been moaning that he hadn't said for quite a while, but he did say it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, John from the Worcester Club, he has a point where he says, "Oh, well, it's in the Reform contract," but but it's also, he has said it on the Winston Marshall show. Oh, and it's a good thing you remind me about, because his comments about Islam leave a lot to be desired. That caused a huge.
Yes, yeah, no, I'd worry about that. I don't think you can kowtow to Islam. I really don't. But you see, there is another problem on the dissident right. If you go on about Islam on the dissident right, you're immediately accused of being an anti-jihadist.
Well,
which is a bad thing, apparently. Because you might or might not be involved with assaulted Zionists.
Well, the main problem, the main guy who basically catapulted that standard into our circles was Nick Fuentes, because oh no, if you support, basically, if you are against Islam, well, Islam is, well, a lot of Muslim countries or a lot of Muslim actors in the Middle East are anti-Israel. Therefore, if you are anti-Islam, you must be pro-Zionist. Then
Yeah,
that's basically.
this is what I see, and you see, I get the criticisms of counter jihad. I can watch Rebel News from Canada, for example, which also operates in Australia and Britain to some degree, and that also is an enormous supporter of Tommy Robinson. I'm not a blind boomer. I can see things, but that doesn't mean Islam is good from the British point of view. It really doesn't. I'm sorry. There are a lot of Islamists in Britain. There are.
Yeah, that's the main
Nearly
problem.
every terrorist incident in Britain involves Islam.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, that's one cause of division really between the Americans and, let's say, the British scene or the German scene. But basically, this side of the Atlantic, whether you're British, German, Swedish, whatever, we all have the same view of Islam, which is we need to root out Islam from the country because at the end of the
Yes.
day, the Muslim minority are perhaps the most disgusting group we've ever imported. Whereas Americans don't get that because they don't really have much of a massive Muslim majority. Massive Muslim group.
Well, I don't know. You could ask
So,
Americans around Dearborn and places like that, and they probably wouldn't agree with you. But yeah, okay, fair enough.
yeah, but it's not a massive feature in American politics, so is it to be as anti-Islam?
Nowhere near as big as it is in Britain. No, absolutely not. But this is my point: is that I get the criticisms of the counter jihad movement. I get that totally. I am neutral, shall we say, about Israel at best, and I entirely get the criticisms of the counter jihad movement, but that doesn't mean that you can say, oh yeah, Britain should just accept a bazillion Islamists. We can't. Their worldview is not ours. They don't like dogs, for God's sake. I don't trust any group that don't like dogs. And I'm being serious about that.
Yeah, so I don't understand how why Freud said that, because he said also one Freudian slip mob he had was him saying, "Oh, well, if we antagonize Islam by 2050, we will lose." But that's the main thing people focused on, and so he's betraying.
Why and how, Mitch? Why and how? We have far more people than the Islamists do in Britain.
But that's a bit that gets me about why did Freud say that? I mean, let's say even if let's say you believe that, you would keep stum about it because, oh yeah, the average reform voter, if you were to ask them about Islam, even not the boomers, they'll just be like, they're all anti-Islam. The boomers side of anti-Islam stuff is basically Christopher Hitchens. Oh, let's get rid of Islam because it's anti-women, anti-homosexuality, blah blah blah, all the civic stuff. Whereas guys like us, we're a lot more anti-Islam because of tribal reasoning. Like, we don't want Islam in our country because they breed a lot more than us, and yeah.
Well, I mean, they're just anti-British culture, basically.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. A lot of people just had a massive shitstorm over Freud saying that because, to be fair, it's true. I mean, some people have said like, "Oh, this is Freud being pragmatic." He didn't want to attack on those Muslims because at the end of the day, we're a long way away from talking about Islam and all. And they go, I don't buy that, to be honest. I understand that we have to be on. I understand we have to pragmatically support Freud, but at the same time, like, when there's an argument of, oh well, we can't antagonize Islam, and Freud says so, therefore we just have to keep stum about this particular issue, even though we all are on the same side and want it gone.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to ask Hitman for his view on this. I mean, Hitman has Glub Pasha as his avatar, so he's probably a good dude to ask about this. Hitman, what's your view on this controversy, shall we say?
Well, it's it's very complicated, and I think this whole idea of if you're not for Israel, you're for Palestine, I think is stupid binary thinking. I mean,
100%.
I won't lie. I would say I'm not pro Palestine. I'm rather anti-Israel. I just think what Israel's doing is clearly evil, but I'm not going to go there and stand for Palestinians. I'm not going to let myself get run over by
That's my view entirely, by
tanks.
the way, Himman. That's my view entirely. I am neutral between Israel and Palestine. Neither of them are our friends.
And there's actually a comment in the chat I want to talk about. It's Tomb of Arminius. Yeah, but the Muslims have Asabiya as a glab reference from Ibn Khaldun. They have collective solidarity as a minority, which Brits don't have. It was surgically removed. Well, that's very interesting you bring that up, Tomb of Arminius, because I would argue that Asabiya, though, yes, it's brought up in the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun, and he's a Arab Islamic scholar. I would say Asabiya is something you can see in all peoples, regardless of whether they're Islamic or not. There is, or for those who don't know, Asabiya translates to group feeling or social cohesion. This is something, all peoples have. If you have a stronger social cohesion, and you can overcome the challenges from other cultures and civilizations. And what he argues is that it can break down with time, as, for example, with the Arabs after they conquered, the Byzantine territories and the Iranian territories. As the generations passed, the dynasties degenerated, and they were overthrown, and the empires broke apart and collapsed. And that is something you can see across all human cultures and histories. And now it's true that our Asabiya in the West is probably weaker than the Muslims, but you also do have to remember the Muslims are still separated from the greater body politic of their own people who are still in the other parts of the world. So we do have a local superiority.
Quite a big one even today, but this is again why I think that net zero migration under reform is vastly important, is if we don't get a reform government at the next election, the British advantage in terms of real Anglo-Celts in the country is going to go down very considerably. 5 years, even if the next election is in 5 years' time, which I don't think it will be. I think it will be before that. But even if it is, another 5 years after that's another at least 3.5 to 4 million immigrants under either Labour or the so-called Conservatives. And I mean legal immigrants. I'm not even talking about the guys coming across on dinghies from France. You have to stop that, and that is the reason you have to vote reform at the next general election and any by-elections that come up in between. I just think that's undeniable. I do want to correct some people in the chat. Like, I perfectly understand the anti-Zionism stuff, the anti-small hat stuff. I totally get it, right? And I don't even disagree with it. But that doesn't mean I'm pro-Islam. It doesn't.
Exactly. And to sort of go on from there, no, I agree with you. Voting reform is the practical solution, but we must obviously prepare ourselves that Farage may not be as good as we're hoping.
Well, I mean, yes, absolutely. In the same way that most realistic Americans realize that Trump probably won't do as much as they hope he will. But what Trump will do is give America a little bit more time. It will give people on the DR a bit more time to organize, and he may push back a little bit, as you said. I think it was you said that, Hitman, or it might have been Mitch, about the getting rid of illegal immigrants who in American elections are allowed to vote. So the Trump may do some good. He may, and he might produce somebody, possibly his vice president, but who knows, he might produce someone who can carry on his work. We don't know.
Again, overall, I don't disagree with you, but I think we'll have to see.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Mitch.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, what is there to be said about reform at the moment? I mean, they're polling the same as they were a few months ago. You got Farage. It's one thing when you have like Steve Edgerton interview where he said, "Oh, mass deportations aren't practical," and they go, "Yeah, he was saying it in the context of, for example, you got the civil service, the OBR, the Bank of England. You also got to mention, you also got to deal with a lot of parliamentary opposition. You're going to have many barriers in your way towards doing any sort of like mass deportation style activity in this country. The system will build itself up in order to oppose you in that way. So that's why Farage isn't really wrong. I just think people misread it. However, when he says that about Islam, it just demoralises others because I'm thinking to myself, it's one thing if he were to say something along the lines of, "Oh, we're kind of taking on Islam because let's not follow because there might be some good Muslims." Because to be fair, he's never signalled himself as counter jihad like ever. He's always been aloof from talking about Islam.
Yes.
But when he's told, right, so for example, the Reform Party, they support Israel. They said so on the anniversary of October 7th. And then they're saying, "Oh, we have to try and assimilate with Muslims." And they go, "Okay, but 3/4 of Muslims in this country are anti-Israel. Like they think that Hamas did nothing wrong whatsoever, blah, blah, blah." They, have all these opinions which a pro-Israel party like Reform would find hard to work with at the very least, if not just everybody in hospital. So at some point, Farage would probably have to go, "Okay, well, the vast majority of Muslims cannot be assimilated. So why does he start talking about?" Because I mean, you got the fact that Muslims are such an intolerable minority as well. But I think if he talked about them, you wouldn't exactly lose many votes in the grand scheme of things.
Mitch, I totally agree with you. All right, I do. You're right. John's place says, "I sympathise with the Palestinians because they are native to that land." To that extent, John, I agree. But you know what? They're not native to Britain. They're not. And as far as I'm concerned, my attitude to the Israel-Palestine conflict is I'm neutral because neither of them are our friends. They're not. I'm sorry. That is my absolute view. Do I think Israel is murdering women and children in Gaza, etc.? Yeah, they are. Absolutely, they are. But you know what? Long way from Britain, not my business.
Besides, we've got too much of our own problems to deal with anyway.
Yeah, we left that place, Hitman, in 1948. We left, you remember? Because the Israelis were hanging captured British sergeants and blowing up British women and children in the King David Hotel. So we left. Not our fucking problem. Excuse my language, but it's not. I'm neutral about that. I really am. Like, I honestly, both sides do atrocities. It's the Middle East. That's what happens in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the arguments as well that with regarding reform. But, oh well, it doesn't matter what Farage says for the time being because Farage is a people pleaser and he'll go our way anyway by the end of the decade. So you might see, let's say, hypothetically, reform going the remigration route by the end of the decade. Now, I don't know how valid that is. I mean, I never really I don't know how much Farage is a people pleaser because I'm thinking, well, you don't get if he was somewhat that much of a people pleaser, he probably would have left politics a long time ago. Because, for example, in 2014, he can't even go to a dinner down to his local pub without getting harassed by local leftists. So I don't see him as being as much of a people pleaser as some people said. But
yeah, look, Davey 1602 is not right. Nigel Farage has said he's happy to do deportations of illegal economic migrants, which is all those guys who come across the channel. None of those guys are genuine refugees because they came from France, so they're not. And he said he will also deport foreign criminals. He said that. So no one needs to convince Farage of that, Davy 1602. On the other hand, I totally agree with Davy when he says it's a quarrel that belongs in the Middle East and has got nothing to do with us. Really. I noticed somebody, I think it was Sonny Jim, said that we left because the United Nations mandate came to an end. No, we didn't, Sonny Jim. That's not true. There was no end.
The mandate ended because we quit. We said we're not doing this anymore.
That's
it's
why
the UN's problem.
Exactly it, man. That was the point I was going to make to Sonny Jim. We left because what was the point of staying there when, like, the Israelis were hanging British soldiers and killing British women and children in the King David Hotel, and also the Arabs didn't like us either. I mean, what was the point? It was we were in a no-win situation, shall we say. You should go watch that excellent American movie Exodus, which is the biggest pro-Israeli propaganda you'll ever see in your life. It's terrible, horrible film, which is like tries to pretend the British were kind of Nazis, which Britain destroyed itself fighting Nazis, but whatever, partly because Winston Churchill was a twat, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, any more thoughts on this, Mitch, before we move on?
Yeah, I just, I mean, as I said, I think Aaron Hawke said it on his stream earlier, which I was also on about the patriotic left. Like, for example, James Callaghan, right, his immigration policy was basically net zero, akin to what Farage is aiming for. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind. Like, I mean, you get some people on the right who just they'll go, look, Farage isn't explicitly calling for mass deportations, therefore he's not our guy. So, well, he doesn't have to be our guy. The fact is, let's say, for argument's sake, he talks about British values. I wish he would talk about something more robust than just values, because values are just, as Powell would say,
100%.
Value. You can't fight for values. You fight for identity. You fight for culture. But let's say, for argument's sake, Farage's rhetoric around that leads to Muslims getting deported anyway. Because I mean, bearing in mind the reform contract as signed in the election was, they're going to get rid of benefits for foreigners who've lived here for fewer than 5 years. So basically, so if let's say you're a foreigner, you can't access benefits at all for 5 years, for example. But now, something like that would bar a lot of Muslims from coming over here, so that would cut off a tap. Well, that's one thing we found out in Denmark. Once they cut welfare by something like 25%, migration just goes down considerably.
100%. 100%.
So this is the thing. It's Farage. There's some things where he didn't have to explicitly say the kind of stuff like Steve Laws would say. Some of his policies indirectly, in terms of the rhetoric, it indirectly helps us. It's just not so open as how someone like me would say it. So there is a use of Farage.
Oh, look, I let me be open about this. Like, I like Horace, for example, who is a friend of Steve Laws and streams with him sometimes. And I've streamed with Horace quite a few times. I like him very much. He's a good bloke. I think he's a patriotic British bloke. I don't always agree with his views on Farage. But, that's fair enough. People can disagree on the right. We're not women. We're not children. And I think we should be able to disagree on certain things, but still be friends. I don't think we should be like girls, and because we disagree on a certain thing, that means you can't talk to that person. That's childish. And the left don't do that, you might notice.
No, that's a fair point. When they encounter one of their enemies, they always lock in their phalanx, don't they? Their shield wall.
Yep, exactly right. That's exactly right, Hitman. And that's what we've got to do. If we can have all these discussions and arguments in private, but in public, Oh, come on, Aubrey, leave it, all right? Yes, I know you're a woman, and you're not a stupid woman, all right? But there are many quite stupid women. There's quite a lot of stupid guys, by the way, as well. But anyway, but yeah, Hitman, you're right about this. Like, we can have our disagreements in private, but in public, we should not be attacking each other. There's no point in punching right. I've said this many times. Don't do it. Don't even punch slightly left of you. It's there's no point to it. You have to maintain a front, as the left worked out many decades ago.
To be fair, the left will go against one another a lot. I mean, the Spanish Civil War being the most famous example, where you got Trotskyists, Stalinists, anarchists, etc., just having a scrap with one another before they had to scrap with
Yeah, they
Franco.
didn't win. They didn't win, though, did they? That was one of the occasions when the right won, Mitch, because the right, which was kind of led by Franco, but included loads of different groups, like, traditional Catholics, traditional Spanish military, etc. What are those guys called? I can't remember
The Falange.
Yeah, thank you, Hitman. All of those guys, they cooperated, okay, because there was a bigger enemy, and I think the right needs to learn that lesson. I really do.
But that's my main point, Bob, is that you have the left in this country, for example. I mean, there's a guy I follow on TikTok and there's Champagne Socialist. He's just a massive communist. He hates Starmer. And that's basically, that's one wing of the left. They all hate Starmer. So it's like, the only people who really, so you got Starmer, who's basically like a Blairite, and that area of British politics is such a thin window now. In 10 years' time, for example, I don't think it'd be possible for someone like Starmer to resurface, because unless the vote will really split between all massive different parties, because that kind of pushy centrism, no one wants it. Like, I mean, there's more popular demand for Corbynism. There's more popular demand for basically full-blown communism, like Corbyn wanted, or full-blown Farageism, than there ever is for this kind of cushy centrism, where it's all about, we just have to strip the pensioners and the Zoomers to pay for all the migrants, blah blah blah.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I see people like Tricky Woo in the chat talking about Germans were an economic threat. If you followed this channel for any length of time, I am not in favor of the Anglo-German wars. 14, 18, 39, 45, not in favor. So you're barking up the wrong tree there, mate, if you're talking about this channel and our views. But anyway, Hitman, did you have a subject you wanted to bring up this week?
Well, there is the fact that tensions with a certain country in Eastern Europe have been increasing, and certain intercontinental ballistic missiles are being thrown about, or threatened to be being thrown about.
Intermediate range ballistic missiles, I believe, is the latest info. But yeah, I agree.
So in a nutshell, the war in Ukraine is heating up because Biden's given permission for these what they called I think they're like thunderstorm missiles to be sent to
ATACMS, American ATACMS, and the British missile that's being used is Storm Shadow.
Sorry, Storm Shadow, that's it. Yeah. So basically, this threat has then led to Putin firing this intermediate ballistic missile at Ukraine, which is something he's not done before. So it shows a massive escalation in the stakes of the war. And then there's also been other threats, like I think apparently that some drones have been unidentified drones have been spotted over Britain. So there's allegations that those Russian drones, but find out.
Where was the RAF is what one would ask if there were really drones over Britain, which I doubt, by the way. But okay. Look, let me make something clear, because this is something I was always going to talk about on the stream, and Mitch may or may not agree with this. what you have to understand about the American ATACMS missiles that they're using and the British Storm Shadow missiles that they're using is the Ukrainians cannot, I repeat, the Ukrainians cannot fire American ATACMS missiles or British Storm Shadow missiles. They're not able to. And because there is coding and all sorts of other stuff, which I am not allowed to talk about because I once signed the Official Secrets Act, in fact, twice, that I'm not literally not allowed to talk about. But you cannot fire those missiles without, in the case of the ATACMS, American military personnel, and in the case of Storm Shadow, British military personnel. The Ukrainians can't fire them on their own. They just can't. I've seen Mitch, for example, say that the Ukrainians managed to hit the Kremlin with a little, with a drone, basically, which was a big failure by the Russian air defenses. But the Ukrainians can fire those on their own. If you're going to fire an American ATACMS missile deep into Russia, you need American military personnel to do so. If you are going to fire a British Storm Shadow missile deep into Russia, you need British military personnel to be able to do so. That is the enormous difference, right? And the Russians are well aware of this. You know, the Russians have military intelligence. The Russians have, Mitch, you'll remind me what the Russian equivalent of MI6 is these days.
FSB.
FSB. The Russians have the FSB. They have their military intelligence. They know this stuff extremely well. You know, the Russians ain't stupid. And so if you're going to fire these long-range Western missiles into Russia, the Russians know very well that the people firing them are actually Americans or Brits. They're not Ukrainians. They can't be Ukrainians.
Okay, and Russia hasn't. I mean, Russia's claimed for ages that NATO officers are embedded in Ukraine, helping with others of Azov Brigade back in the Mariupol. So again, this idea that we're all going to get nuclear war basically because of these long-range missiles.
Slow down, Mitch. Slow down. You'll have your chance to reply to this. All right. I don't think anyone who is not a moron or who knows nothing whatsoever about the military has the slightest doubt that there are British SAS and SBS troops in Ukraine and have been since the start of the war. I don't think anyone who is not a moron or knows nothing about the military doubts that there are American Navy SEALs and what have you in Ukraine and have been since the start of the war. All right? Everyone knows that. It's not a big deal. We know it. The Russians know it. My point is where this is a new thing, and bear in mind, this is a lame duck American government. Biden's got, 7 weeks that he's still president. But of course it's not Biden because Biden doesn't know what day it is. He's so he's totally gaga. So whoever is organizing the Americans is doing that. But in Britain, we have Sir Keir Starmer, who is like the most unimaginative, anti-real Anglo-Celtic British man you could possibly imagine as our prime minister, who is, the guy claims he doesn't even dream, which I believe because he's like a robot-like moron, basically, who thinks, no, I should be able to allow British military personnel to fire missiles deep into Russia, and the Russians will never do anything back to us.
I will say regarding this whole thing, like Russians claim every time they do a missile strike that they killed off X amount of NATO officers in Ukraine. So the Russians know full well they'll probably NATO officers. We don't. I mean, I don't. We don't know for certain because, well, what? How could we ever know?
I would be willing to lay £1 million that there are British SAS, probably SBS, in fact, almost certainly SBS because of what the Ukrainian Navy does, and American special forces in Ukraine, and have been since the start of the war. I'd lay £1 million on that.
Okay, and ever since the start of the war, they've always been claiming this. No nuclear weapons are flown because of it. Like the Russians complain, but aside from doing missile strikes and chastising us, and then not really doing anything when the red lines get crossed by NATO. No, this is what I get my air off with a lot of people on the right on Twitter who just spend their time fear mongering about it, even though as I said, when nothing ever happens to it, like myself, get vindicated every time. Lo and behold, nothing ever happens. Aside from
I'm never sure, Mitch, with you. I'm never sure if you're just not annoyed that the Russians aren't more aggressive.
Half yes, half no. Half yes in the sense that on one, like the Russians can't really have no one. Putin has no one to blame but himself in the sense that the West keep escalating because he doesn't. Like every time a red line gets crossed, all he does is talk about it, but he doesn't really do anything major. Like how many red lines have been crossed since the start of this invasion? Secondly,
what do you think, Mitch? What do you think about what he did the day before yesterday in Ukraine?
Judging what I've seen, apparently the IC. I forget what it was. It's not an ICBM. It was something else.
It's an intermediate range missile.
Yeah. So basically, apparently it had no warhead. So people are saying like, "Oh, well, this Russian weapon didn't work," and because it wasn't loaded with a bloody warhead. And now people are using it to claim, "Oh, Russian nuclear weapons don't actually work," and I'm sort of thinking to myself,
"Yeah, all right."
Yeah,
well, look, anyone in the world, bitch, has seen Soviet and Russian nuclear tests, which include the biggest nuclear bomb that has ever been let off. And all the Western intelligence dudes saw that being let off.
Yeah, it's like I feel like the only platform in this country that actually is saying about this is basically GB News, because they've got like Daniel Davis on regularly these days. He just says, "Oh, for example, I saw him arguing against bloody Jacob Rees-Mogg over the fact that this war can't be won." Meanwhile, just got Jacob Rees-Mogg just like he's spouting, "Oh, we have to stop Putin because if we don't, then he's going to invade all over Europe. He's basically going to become the next Hitler, basically." That's it.
Mitch, how long has this war gone on so far? Isn't it over 1,000 days?
In terms of a Russian, Russian invasion or whatever you want to call it, yes. In terms of I don't know what you call it, basically the massive tensions between Russia and Ukraine when you're going back to 2014. So,
yeah, 100%. I fully subscribe to the view the Russians invaded because the West wouldn't listen to any of their warnings, and that there was a color revolution backed by the CIA and the British MI6 in Kiev way back, when they burnt loads of Russian citizens to death. I totally subscribe to all of that. But the actual war has gone on over 1,000 days. How does anyone think that if it takes that long for Putin to capture the Russian bits of Ukraine, and that's really what he's aiming at capturing, is the Russian-speaking bits of Ukraine, how does anyone think he can then go on and go deep into Europe? It's not going to happen, and Putin doesn't want to do that, in my opinion. But
that's one thing. That's another nail in the coffin for me regarding the Pinochet regime, as Morgoth and AA would put it. But the fact is, the Bermuda regime also informs foreign policy because, oh no, we can't have Russia just invading countries and taking land. Because if we do, then we're basically going to live in, we're basically going to have the world peace, whatever world order, whatever you want to call it, torn up. And I go, I'll be honest, like the multipolarity talk, I don't really mind it because at the end of the day, let's say for argument's sake, Russia forms a bloc that opposes us. That's actually a good thing because it stops our neocon elites from starting up wars all over again in the Middle East because now there's enough opposing bloc.
Mitch, forgive me, but am I not right in saying that America and Britain invaded Iraq and America and Britain invaded Afghanistan? So why is it all right for us to invade places but not Russia?
Obviously, because Russia is not bringing, democracy and human rights. That's why.
Russia won. Russia won. Russia. Like, I think it was like before. I think it was 2011 or 2012 where Putin signed a law that basically said, "Oh yeah, there can be no more Russian kids adopted by literally American gay couples." And ever since then, the mainstream media has just been massively anti-Putin ever since. Because before that, it was like, oh, a bit aloof of him, but he's leader of Russia, so we're not going to mind him too much. But ever since then, it's been anti-Putin. Yeah.
Good evening, AI. How are you going, mate?
Hello.
Good day, AI. How are you going? Yeah, look, I mean, it's just the pure hypocrisy of Britain and America who go around invading people from time to time. And, sometimes people need invading. But if we can do it, why can't Russia?
I will say, I was just going to segue something else, whatever. I don't think Trump will be able to fully negotiate a peace deal for the simple fact that I don't see. I mean, you have like on one hand, both sides will have to negotiate because, for example, you got the Ukrainians. Well, I mean, if you look up, if you're a map supporters like myself, you can see that Ukraine's been giving up quite a bit of land as of late, especially the last few months. So there's a lot of demobilization on the Ukrainian side, but also with Trump,
Russia's winning the war. Russia is winning the war. Watch the most neutral, commentators on the war, and even pro-Ukrainian commentators on the war, and Russia is winning pretty much everywhere. This much is obvious. I mean, I was watching a video this evening where the Ukrainians were blowing up towers that the Russians could use for observation and buildings they could use for shelter and defense as they retreated. And it just brought to mind to me, like the German army retreating in 1944, basically.
Oh yeah, there's that clip of the Germans blowing up railway bridges as they were retreating along it, or I think even in one case is that they were just not even blowing it up; they were just sort of ripping up the wooden beams.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, they were blowing up the roadbed. I think that's a pretty well-known video. But the Ukrainians are doing the same thing because they can't hold. And Russia has far more men. It has far more artillery. It has far more ammunition, and it has almost total air superiority. How are Russia going to lose? I mean, the people still saying Ukraine can win this war, to me, fall into two categories. Some of them are neocons who just lie, and the rest of them know nothing whatsoever about anything military.
Well,
they're the only people who claim Ukraine can win this war. Ukraine's lost this war and probably had lost it 6 months ago, really.
Yeah, do you remember? It must have been probably over a year ago now. I remember I was on your channel for this. We were looking at that Ukrainian offensive. Do you remember that big summer offensive that was meant to take place? I think it was last year. And
oh yeah, that was when the NATO morons all put up those videos about the Crimean beach pie, and in fact they made about 5 miles at most into any of the Russian defenses, and all of them were killed or destroyed.
that huge tank convoy that they were all like tweeting about and sharing memes and all that sort of stuff. And I remember there was I think I was on a stream, someone else's stream, and the thumbnail was basically this crater where all these tanks and everything were in, and it was basically because they went out in the open, they advanced about a few hundred meters, and artillery and Russian tanks and the air because again, as you said, the Russians have had air superiority over Ukraine for pretty much the whole war. Since the invasion in, what was it, 2021?
Well, the handful of F-16s that the Ukrainians can actually pilot barely dare take off in Western Ukraine. And they certainly can't go into Eastern Ukraine because they'll be destroyed almost instantly. It's just a joke. It's a bad joke.
Yeah.
It really, the idea Ukraine can win this war is the bad joke. It's just craziness. The longer this war goes on, the only thing that's going to happen is the more Ukrainians who are going to die. And we've all seen the many, many videos of young Ukrainian dudes, like going shopping with their family, for example, who are dragged away by the Ukrainian secret police and thrown into vans with their wives and children screaming and crying next to them. We've all seen this. And we know these guys get, if they're lucky, maybe a month of training before they're sent to go and die in front of the Russians, whereas the Russians have plenty of volunteers and a far bigger force. I'm sorry, numbers have a quality all of their own. They really do.
Yeah, I was just to say, I'm trying to point on the idea of Trump not being able to get someone having some room to negotiate. I mean, it's like oil prices will go down quite a bit under Trump. If that happens, then Russian oil revenues will go down considerably. So that might draw them to the negotiating table. However, Trump won't want to be known as a guy who sold out Ukraine. So, but there's big.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to do that, Mitch. I really don't think that's going to happen because Trump has signaled for a long time one of his number one priorities in terms of foreign affairs is stopping the war. And I just think if he cuts off military funding to Ukraine, which I think he will, and he's powerful enough that he can also stop European military funding to the war, the Ukrainians will have no choice but to go to the peace table. And whether or not we get a peace will entirely depend on whether the Ukrainians are willing to give Putin what he wants, which I think is a border somewhere around the Dnieper River and probably Odessa. You know, Odessa's a Russian sea. If I was Putin and a Russian, I would definitely want Odessa. So yeah, we'll see. But all Trump needs to do is cut off that military funding to Ukraine, and it's been going down anyway for the simple reason that no European country, including Britain, and even the Americans, have almost nothing spare left to send them. We just don't have anything left.
What's funny, Iron Duke, is that and Hitman will know of this because we've both sort of been watching Adam Curtis series, and on the one that was about the rise of the neocons and the rise of the Islamists, and I think on Hitman's channel we actually saw a clip from that that 3-part documentary. It shows the I guess you could say the neocon myth around the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia as this sort of perennial threat. And even at that time, not many people on the the establishment wing of the Republican Party or the establishment itself were truly convinced. And this has sort of become a neocon myth. And I think the reason why a lot of the old, the neocons today, the people that the people that backed Kamala Harris and people that are so anti-Trump, is because they are effectively still in this obsessive mentality of having Russia as the big bad enemy, when in reality, um, you know, the world has moved on from 1980.
But also, I would say this, AI, is that in the early 2000s, Putin, Putla, as he's so often called by the Western media, who want to pretend he's a reincarnation of AH. Putin wanted Russia to join NATO, and NATO said no way.
Yeah, it was NATO. It was you could argue the same elements within that neocon that pushed him away.
Yeah.
And also, during Bush's time, there was that interview which I remember going around a few years ago, where Bush and saying were categorically saying, I think Blair was saying as well, that there wasn't going to be the Baltic states, Ukraine. There will not be an expansion of NATO into the former
They
Eastern
did
Bloc
say
countries.
that, and they totally lied. Yeah.
Yeah, they totally lied, and you know. And the funny thing is, like Georgia at the moment, and Armenia are going through mini, almost like quiet, cold, civil wars between pro-Western, what is effectively pro-Western, and pro-Russian. And you've had various like I think it was in I think it was in Armenia or one of the two recently. You've had like a mini velvet revolution style to bring down the government
Yeah,
about who
there's a
has.
lot of that.
Yeah,
There is a lot of that going on. Yeah, I've watched some stuff about that and read some stuff about that. But I mean, if you really want peace in the world and all the rest of it, wouldn't it be better if Russia was a member of NATO? And of course, had Russia become a member of NATO, they wouldn't have been friends with China, for example. Because Russia and China are not natural friends. In fact, they're almost natural enemies because of their long border in the east. And any sensible Western diplomacy would have thought, joining Russia to the West would have been a damn good idea. But instead, because of the neocons and the morons like Starmer, etc., you've got a Russian-Chinese alliance, which is the worst thing you could possibly get from the West's point of view.
yeah, no, 100%.
It's just insane. I mean, it's like before World War II, Italy was relatively pro-British until Anthony Eden went along and really got upset about Italy taking over Abyssinia, despite the fact that Italy probably ran Abyssinia far better than the Abyssinians, Ethiopia these days. And it was no bad thing from Britain's point of view. That's why Mussolini, who didn't like AH, ended up being an ally, is because of Anthony Eden and his moronic ideas. Same things happened, really, with Russia and China. So you now have this group, which is like Russia and China, and slightly less centrally Iran and North Korea, etc. I'm not me, but the moron neocons and absolute anti-British morons like Starmer have managed to make these people a group.
What's really interesting, ING, you mentioned Anthony Eden there, but obviously on my channel I covered the Suez Crisis with Charlemagne, and what's astounding is during that crisis is that he kept thinking back to 1938 and the Munich Agreement, which he resigned over, and so he was literally haunted by appeasement. No, we can't appease Nasser. That'd be like it'd be an Arab Hitler. We can't do this. No, and you took Britain into one of the biggest diplomatic blunders in its history.
Yep,
well
totally
done.
Totally agree, mate. But also, from my point of view with Eden in '56, he just should have said to Eisenhower, "Look, mate, this is a vital British interest. We're going to complete our military operation." But Eden wasn't even brave enough to do that.
Well, the problem is, though, ING, because I just think he should have waited a bit, because there was a US election was around the same time, and Eisenhower didn't want to do anything too risky. So I think the British should have been a bit more patient.
For sure. I mean, and also, look, purely from a military point of view, Britain signaled we were going to do it and then took 6 months to actually organize it, which was, a very long time. But militarily, it was going very well. And had I been Eden, I would have said to Eisenhower, "Look, mate, we're your biggest ally against the Soviet Union. If you really want to destroy us financially, go for it, but we're still going to complete our operation." And Eden wasn't brave enough to do that.
Thing is, I don't think any of our political leadership would have been brave enough to have done that.
Listen, I'm not a big fan of Churchill, but Churchill said one true thing. He said about the Suez Crisis, "I wouldn't have been brave enough to do it, but if I did do it, I wouldn't have been stupid enough to have stopped." Again. And I don't like Winston Churchill, as everyone knows who follows this channel. But he was right about that.
Yeah,
I would say.
Sorry, go ahead, Mitch.
I was just say, in regards to just to segue back to Russians. I wonder what Trump. I don't know what Trump also would do. On one hand, he doesn't want to be known as the guy who could sell out the Ukrainian semi-river, and also the neocons within Commonwealth do have significant influence.
You're breaking up a bit, Mitch. I don't know why, but you are.
No, I think it's AI echo algorithm.
I don't think Trump's going to have that issue, because Trump has signaled for a long time he wants that war to stop. And as I said earlier, I think most Americans are really totally fed up with giving Ukraine money, far more than the Brits. But then, the British propaganda has been worse than the American propaganda, as so often these days.
I will say, if you have Matt Gaetz, for example, he's been turned out, for example. So the clear the neocon wing of the GOP still have massive sway with Trump. Secondly, people might say, "Oh well, Republic are getting tired of it," and they go, "Oh, we don't want a mass immigration either, but it still happens." So do you think that our politicians give a whip about our opinions?
To some degree, that's true, but I don't know. I do think there's a bit more realism and pro-American stuff in American politics than there is in British politics. I really do. I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think that American politics still matters more. It's still more realistic to what actual Americans want than British politics. I don't think British politics has been aligned with the real British people for a very, very, very long time. The one exception was the Brexit vote. And one reason I have a certain respect for Nigel Farage is that Farage was the biggest single person that got that. It was totally subverted afterwards, of course it was, but the actual vote was a win for the real British people. But it was subverted afterwards. I mean, you guys say what you want to say. I don't know.
I also I suppose there's also another good question of, okay, well, because I mean Trump in his first term he was able to get Putin to not side with China because there was how do I put it? But basically he offered an olive branch for Putin, and Putin could still have good relations with us, or at least have decent enough relations with the West in general. But then Biden came along, and Putin thought, okay, there's no point reasoning with the West, therefore he chose to invade Ukraine. So I don't know how Trump is going to navigate himself around that, trying to get Putin back into more our circles as opposed to the alliance with China we've got.
I think he'll find it almost impossible, Mitch, to be honest. It's like he may try, but I can't see how he can do that. I do think he might be able to bring an earlier close to the Ukrainian war. But other than that, I don't see him being able to do much.
I'm going to have to head off now because I think my internet is. We've got pretty bad weather here, so everything's sounding a bit static on my end.
You sound all right at the moment. I was just going to ask you if you had something you wanted to talk about, but if you need to go, you need to go.
I mean, no, apart from the only thing I would say is support our farmers, support British-made goods, and support the British farmers 100% because, as I said in my stream, farming is about producing life. Liberalism is about subverting and ending life, and is anti-life. So we can't let these spiteful anti-humans win.
100% agree, man. 100% agree.
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean that's all I got to say. Anyway, thank you for having me on briefly, but hopefully next weekend I'll get sort of better conditions.
You're always welcome on this channel, AI.
No worries. Thank you, Iron Duke, and thank you everyone.
See you later.
See you later, everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. AI is a good guy, and he's always welcome on this channel. And yeah, I support British farmers. I mean, you can't produce food, then your country's in real shit, man. It really is. But yeah, do any of us not think that Britain is in real shit? I doubt it, to be honest.
Well, no, I can't say I disagree.
Really? I mean, government versus farmers, for God's sake. The guys who actually produce the food you have to eat every day.
Bearing in mind the average Labour Party activist probably doesn't eat British grown food, but rather eats imported avocados or whatever. So, or they probably of the same mindset, something like Julius Malema, where they think all their food comes from the supermarket as opposed to from a farm.
Well, they'll be horribly surprised if they turn up to the supermarket and find it seem, empty one day.
Yeah. Look, I mean,
or perhaps not empty, but like everything is twice the price it used to be.
Britain can't feed itself, by the way. So Britain hasn't been able to feed itself for a very long time, but you know.
Or maybe if we got rid of all the foreigners and, you know, employed a little bit more in agriculture, then maybe we could be.
Maybe. Although I also think that's why you needed beg your pardon. That is why you need a relatively powerful Royal Navy, because starvation doesn't generally go well with a country. But yeah. Pardon me, I beg your pardon.
I don't know what new topic there is, because I mean we pretty much talked about Farage, Ukraine, Trump. I mean, I suppose there's a whole subject of a Matt Gates thing, but I mean, I've only watched one stream about it, and it's basically just confirming what I would have said, or my view anyway, which was why did Trump go get rid of Matt Gates only to have his Bondy woman in as Attorney General when Matt Gates was actually the real radical article, I suppose. I mean, whereas this Bondy woman, I mean, it looks like she supported red flag laws, plus her only other noticeable thing is that she's massively pro as well, whereas Matt Gates was a lot more.
But he didn't take any APAC money, and well, what's interesting on the topic is because Auron actually did a stream with Prudentials yesterday on this whole issue, and it seems to be a combination of the fact that Matt Gates has been kind of like a bull in the china shop in Congress. He's pissed off too many of the GOP politicians in there. He's burnt too many bridges. There's also the fact he has not taken any APAC money, and there's also the fact that there's this alleged scandal where he apparently slept with an underage girl, and so he's basically seen as a liability. And so the most positive interpretation you can take from this is that he was put there just to get them to accept the second pick, which was Bondi, because she's still, I think, an okay pick. And, you know, there's far worse people Trump could have put in that position. Or obviously there's a whole argument of where you're going with where, yeah, it's a total L and Trump was just BTFO'd.
I would say, Hitman, that if he was accused of sleeping with an underage girl, that is an absolutely typical APAC slur. So, might not be true at all.
Well, I thought it was not true, but from what I've actually heard from listening to Auron, it sounds that there might actually be more grounds to that allegation, because apparently he's known to be a bit of a lech, Matt Gates, unfortunately. So,
all right, okay. Yeah, maybe. Look, the woman who's replaced him is some Americans like bits of her, but she's in favor of red flag laws, which are very anti-gun. So there is that.
the only thing I would say is that though she may be in favor of them, they may not actually get put through because, you know, Trump might veto it. So we can only see.
Reality, who's actually an American, says the underage girl admitted she did not make her age known. So if he did sleep with an underage girl, she never told him. So yeah, that sounds about right for APAC, to be honest.
Yeah, I was also going to say this does lie a bit of doubt as to whether is Trump going to do the mass deportations as he was saying. Let's say if he's willing to blink about putting someone like Gates as Attorney General because some of the neocon wing of GOP have cold feet about it. How is he going to be able to have? How is he going to get the GOP to agree with him on stuff like mass deportation, even though it would actually be the benefit of a GOP to actually do these mass deportations.
Well, he's got presidential powers, so he probably could, to be honest. I would just say this. All reality says the underage girl admitted she did not make her age known. Now, look, I'm getting on a bit now, but I do remember when I was like 19, 20, 21, I really couldn't tell whether a girl was 16, 17, or 18. I'm sorry, I couldn't. To some degree, it depended on how much makeup she was wearing and how developed she was. So, there is truth in that. And reality, I will point out, is a woman. So there we go.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Aubrey's mentioning a nightclub, and they go, "Yeah, that's just bad. That's just common, not just in America, but over here as well." Which is one reason why nightclubs are declining. I don't think it's bigger reason as I sometimes overhype it to be, but I mean, it's like that's a common shop where you go to a night where let's say a 24-year-old lad goes to a nightclub, he sleeps with a girl, and he turns out said girl is like 14. He then gets a massive bollocking from the law. Meanwhile, the girl who deceived him doesn't get anything. So you've got a massive
100%. 100%. I used to go to a pub in the Old Kent Road, Mitch, called the Dun Cow, which anyone who lived in that part of the world in that time would know. And the saying in that pub was, if you find a girl in this pub who was over 18, it's very unusual. Because it was full of like 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old women. But they didn't look that age. They looked quite a lot older. So, I'm sorry, if a chick looks like, I've seen this many times. Are men supposed to have this kind of radar in their head that says, oh, this chick is under 18? How exactly? It's nonsense. All right? It just is. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm no way supporting pedophiles or people who go for obviously children. But you can't always tell if a chick is 16 or 18. You just can't. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, that's one problem I've got with how would you call it? But basically, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the cases where they say, oh, well, this politician raped a girl, and it turns out what happened was the politician, let's say as a young man, let's say a 22-year-old bloke or whatever, had sex with a 14-year-old girl, and says 14-year-old girl turned out to have deceived him. But it doesn't matter because basically living in the gynocracy, whatever you call it, we live in. Basically, it doesn't matter whether the man's reasoning is legitimate, or whether the man is actually innocent, whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact is, he gets bollocks because at the end of the day, basically, feminist and lard arses rule the day. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's perfectly possible for a 16-year-old girl to wear a load of makeup, be relatively well developed, and there ain't no way as a young bloke of 20 or 21 you can tell if she's 18 or 16. You just can't. And funny thing is, most like relationships or whatever you want to call them don't start with some dude saying, I want to see your ID. They don't.
Well, the whole thing
Bit of a mood killer.
It's insane. It's actually insane. But anyway, whatever. All right. Did either of you guys have something else you wanted to bring up for this evening, or have you more or less gone through what you wanted to go through?
I think we've gone through everything that's been significant in the past week or so. Unless Mitch has got anything.
Mitch?
I don't remember any other topic really.
All right, because I've got a final subject. Well, two final subjects, really. First thing is, while Sir Keir Starmer, who does not dream, who has no imagination, and who has an intense hatred for any Anglo-Celtic real Brit, whilst he is allowing British military guys to fire Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia, whilst he's doing that, he's also doing enormous cuts to the British Armed Forces.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think Aaron mentioned it earlier on your stream where it said like, so you have the Labour Party, for example, back in 1932, vote against rearmament, but then spend their time saying we need to confront fascism, blah blah blah. So
yeah, like a complete bullshit argument. You know, if you're going to do that, then you need strong armed forces. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party recently inflicted on the Royal Navy a very heavy, the equivalent of a very heavy defeat. They have scrapped a Royal Navy frigate. We only had 16 of them to start with. Now it's only 15. They scrapped two important Royal Fleet Auxiliary oilers that are there to refuel ships in action. And most importantly, they have decided to scrap both of the British amphibious assault ships, HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, which mean that Britain can no longer do something like a Falklands War retaking. We can't do that anymore because the Royal Marines can't land from those ships, so we just can't do it anymore. If Argentina manages to occupy the Falkland Islands, Britain has no warships to take them back. We have no warships that can land Royal Marines and British soldiers to retake them. It's the end of it. And these are not old ships. They were built in the late 1980s. Pretty good ships. Gone. The equivalent, as I say, of a huge defeat for the Royal Navy under two-tier care and the Labour Party. At the same time as we are trying, as far as I can see, to start a war with Russia. Doesn't make any sense to me.
No, but I think what essentially he's doing is by being aggressive towards Russia, he gets to please all of the globalists who are anti-Russia, but also by hurting the Royal Navy, he can also damage the power of British sovereignty, which is also something the globalists want.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's remember Starmer and his completely anti-British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, like a moron, a guy with an IQ of under 100, I suspect, have recently, they're trying to sell the British Indian Ocean Territory, which is a major naval base and air base, paid for mostly by the Americans, so it doesn't cost the Brits anything, but we use it a lot. They want to sell that to Mauritius, but the Brits are going to pay Mauritius to take it because, you know, we have so much spare money. You know, we're going to freeze our British pensioners to death this winter while we're going to pay Mauritius money to take over a British-owned colony in the Indian Ocean. Makes a lot of sense to me. Not.
Well, I think it's entirely makes sense from Starmer's point of view. You know, the British people are evil colonialists, so they have to freeze to death in winter when their winter fuel allowance goes to the brown people, which they enslaved so long ago. So, you know, it's perfectly just in Keir Starmer's mind.
Yeah, he's an evil man. He's like really, Starmer is actually an evil man. But yeah, this is what's going on at the moment, and the British defence cuts have not even been started yet. These were announced before the Labour defence cuts were even announced. So there's going to be far more than this. And yet we're supposedly trying to start a war with Russia, which is one of the most powerful nations in the world. To me, it's like it's a definition of insanity. It's like you have a death wish, you know.
Well, another point is, am I right in saying that when it comes to trying to deal with like the illegals coming over the channel, isn't the Royal Navy used to like escort them or block them?
No one's done that. No one's done that.
What I meant to say was, don't the Royal Navy like escort them, or at least in the past, as in other countries like Australia, haven't they used the Navy to like stop like migrant boats from like landing? Because what I wonder is not is Starmer
damaging the past, but in the past.
So what if Starmer's deliberately damaging the Navy to make it harder for a potential use of the Navy to deal with the migration problem?
Well, to be fair, Hitman, the Royal Navy doesn't need to use a frigate or a destroyer to stop migrants coming over in dinghies. You can use a patrol boat for that, Anything with a auto cannon or a machine gun on the front would be perfectly fine. But they don't try it. They don't even try. They don't even try.
Well, what I'm thinking is, what if we got the Farage government and he actually grew a spine and said, right, we are going to do mass deportations. Well, wouldn't you need proper force with actual Navy ships to pull that off if you're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people?
I would just say you only need fast patrol boats with a machine gun or an auto cannon on the front. You don't need frigates and destroyers. But there's radar looking over the English Channel. It's not like anything comes across there that we can't see. But Britain's an island nation. We're a trading nation. We can't feed ourselves. The weaker the Royal Navy gets, the more vulnerable the British people get. That's absolute fact. My view is when you look at the British Armed Forces, you have to put them in priority. Royal Navy first, then Royal Air Force, and finally British Army. But that's just me. I'm just sensible. That's what Britain has always done for the past 500 years. But whatever. So yeah, it's just bullshit. You can't try and start a war with Russia while doing defense cuts at the same time. But that's exactly what Tutier, Starmer, and the Labour Party are doing. It's insanity. It's total insanity. Like, if Russia is a big threat, then what are you doing defense cuts for?
Again, as I said, I see it more as a kind of virtue signaling. He wants to please the globalists who don't like Putin and Russia. He wants to cozy up to them.
He's got, all right, Hitman, I see what you're saying, but he's got 7 weeks until Trump takes power, at which point he's pretty much got to do what Trump says, because Britain is a vassal of America.
Well, certainly that's what he's doing at the moment, but perhaps it'll be interesting when Trump does become the president again, what will actually happen. I mean, obviously, because there's been this idea that, Starmer will be the PM until 2028, 2029. Well, I think there's a chance of him going sooner, and, even Steve Laws has talked about this. He says he thinks Starmer will be gone by Easter next year. I mean, AA's talked about, the whole idea of, Ukraine being flushed down the toilet with Biden. Well, what if Starmer gets flushed down with them?
Oh, I think that's a very good chance. I mean, look, I am totally convinced this Labour government will not go a full 5 years. They're just too hated. They're just doing too many anti-British things. And they're making it too obvious. I mean, like the vile traitor Tony Blair did a great deal to destroy Britain. And I know AA loves Tony Blair. He has a fairly gay bromance with Tony Blair. Me, I think he was the biggest British traitor of all time. But he didn't make it as obvious as Starmer does. You know, well, even Blair was more intelligent than that.
Well, to be fair, I think that whole is just a bit of a joke. ING guy. I think AA respects Blair, who doesn't like him.
I think he likes him, actually. I think in fact, I know he voted for him, for God's sake, which I certainly never did.
Well, I mean, that was when AA was like, what, in his early 20s or something. So
well,
I don't think he'd vote for him now.
Even in my early 20s, I never voted for a socialist, but okay. But yeah, I think he has a bromance with Blair, which I do not share. I think he was a vile traitor. Detest him. But the thing about Starmer is he's even less intelligent, you know. AA did not vote Leave, so he has said repeatedly he voted to stay in the again, a mistake in my opinion, but whatever. But yeah, no, Blair was a vile scum, but Starmer's a stupid vile scum, if you see what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, that then opens up the debate of who would you rather have in power? Would you rather have someone like Boris Johnson or Starmer at the helm? And I'm thinking, I'd rather have Starmer.
Neither.
I'd rather have Starmer at the helm if I had to pick between mostly, just because Starmer's that much of a vicious idiot that he actually just helps our cause. Because I mean, I forget who said it, but someone said the right to do best when the Labour Party are in charge, basically. So.
Okay. I've never voted Labour, so I don't know. But I will say the last Conservative I voted for was Maggie Thatcher, who at least was actually a Conservative. Never voted for any of the subsequent Conservatives in inverted commas. So yeah. But yeah, I look at, like I said, Britain's in the middle of the biggest defense cuts it's had in many years, while we're trying to start a war with Russia, which to me is insane. Now, I know that Mitch will say, oh, no, there won't be a nuclear war, nothing ever happens. And I think he's probably right. But the only reason it won't happen is because Putin is actually a good and sensible leader of Russia. It's nothing to do with Sir, in inverted commas, Keir Starmer and his anti-British regime, who actually would start a nuclear war if they could, because Starmer has no imagination. He's like a robot. He's an anti-British, anti-Anglo-Celtic commie who just hates real white British people. And yes, he's married to a Jewish woman, apparently. Although from everything I hear, it's a con. You know, Starmer's probably gay. I don't know.
Yeah, he's more enamored with Lord Ali.
Yeah, I suspect so. I suspect he bends over for Lord Ali on a regular basis. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you also have some people saying there's going to be a massive discovery about the cover-up with Southport.
Oh, it'll come out. It'll come out.
Like, I'll be honest, I'm cynical about this one, just because there are plenty of people who are claiming, oh, they've got knowledge of this cover-up, and no, it's just centralized grifters trying to have some clout about it, when they probably don't know. Well, they probably know far less than what Forge knows. And the problem you've got is subjudice with this case where you can't say anything lest you prejudice the case. But it's all right for Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper to call everyone protesting against this far right.
Mitch, people forget that at the height of the so-called grooming gang scandal, right? And it's called a grooming gang scandal, but what it really was massive numbers of little white English and British girls being raped, gang raped, given drugs, branded, tortured, called white sluts. That's what it really was. And at the height of that, the director of public prosecutions in Britain was Starmer. People forget this. I was pointing this out before the election, but most people forgot it. Aubrey Alley says, I have a bit of a romance going on with Putin. She can go get fucked, and if I talk to her again, she'll be lucky. But there we go. Because I really don't, and she's just being a girl. But the fact is that when most of these vile scum who were raping little English girls as young as 11 or 12, who were mostly Pakistanis and some Bangladeshis, but mostly Pakistanis. Sir Keir Starmer was the person who was making sure the vast majority of those people were not prosecuted. And I have been saying this for years. Go back on my channel, go and check it out. Yeah, Vex Pearl, you're not wrong about that, mate. But anyway, I'm a bit annoyed at the moment, so there we go. Any final thoughts, Mitch or Hitman?
No, not from me.
No, I think we've been pretty thorough on the topics.
All right. We will be back next week for Splendid Isolation. Number 199. We're getting up towards 200. Let me just have a check in case we got any super chats on Entropy. No, we did not. Okay. Fair enough. In that case, I'm going to play us over a tune if it plays. If it don't, well, whatever. Okay.
Bo Nelson's praise I'm going to sing, not forgetting our glorious king. He always did good tidings bring, for he was a good commander. There's Sidney Smith and Duncan too, Lord Hume and all the jovial crew. He was threatened to whine, but many a time he had been tried. He fought like a hero till he died. That's the man for old England. He faced his foe with his sword in hand, and he lived and he died in glory. For Bonaparte he threatened war, a man who feared not wound or as Lord Nelson's actions made him quake, and all French powers he made to shake. He said his king he'd never forsake. These last words there he spoke, stand true, my lads, like hearts of oak, and the battle shall be glorious.
Okay, that was from friend of the channel, Patriotic Archive. Go check it out. Patriotic Archive has an excellent channel of British naval and military tunes, and also folk songs, etc., and a few others. Thank you to my guests, Mitch and Hitman. And we'll be back next week to talk about what's going on next week in the clown world that we live in today. Go well, folks.
Go well.